The roar of gunshots echoed across the Montana plains as Dahlia Valente crouched behind an overturned wagon, clutching her father's old Winchester rifle with trembling hands. Just 3 days ago, she'd been tending the small general store her family owned in Timber Creek, Montana. Now, her father lay dead, and rustlers were stealing what remained of their livelihood, the small herd of cattle that represented her last chance at survival in the unforgiving territory of 1878. Dahlia steadied her breath, preparing to make what might be her final stand, when the thunder of approaching hoofbeats made her heart stutter. Through the haze of dust and gunsmoke appeared a lone figure on horseback, riding hard toward the chaos. The stranger's face was obscured beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but there was no mistaking the determined set of his shoulders as he drew his pistol and fired with deadly precision. Miles Fletcher hadn't planned on being a hero that morning. He'd been tracking a herd of wild mustangs when gunfire drew him to the small homestead. Now, as he watched a young woman with fire in her eyes attempt to defend her cattle against 6 armed rustlers, he knew his solitary journey would have to wait. The West had taken everything from him once before he wouldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else. "Get down," Miles shouted as he dismounted in one fluid motion, drawing his second revolver. The woman looked up, her eyes widening in momentary surprise, before she nodded and adjusted her position. Together, they fought off the band of rustlers, their shots finding marks until the remaining thieves retreated into the distance, leaving 3 of their companions dead in the blood-soaked grass. When the dust settled, Miles approached cautiously, holstering one gun but keeping the other ready. Trust came at a premium in these parts. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. It had been months since he'd spoken to another person. Dahlia stood slowly, her dark hair tumbling from its hastily arranged knot. Her dress was covered in dust and smudges of gunpowder, but she stood straight, rifle still clutched in her hands. "I am now, thanks to you," she replied, studying him with intelligent brown eyes. "Name's Dahlia Valente, Miles Fletcher," he offered, tipping his hat slightly. "Those rustlers likely to come back?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "They're Harlan Wade's men. They've been after our land for months." Miles glanced around at the modest homestead, a small cabin with smoke still curling from the chimney, a barn that had seen better days, and a corral where a few dozen cattle lowed nervously. "Where's the rest of your family?" Dahlia's expression hardened. "My father was buried yesterday." Harlan's men shot him when he refused to sell. Miles had heard enough. He'd seen this story play out across the frontier, powerful men taking what they wanted from those who couldn't defend themselves. He'd sworn never to get involved again after losing his own family to similar circumstances in Wyoming, but something in Dahlia's determined stance stirred forgotten feelings. "I can help you move your cattle to safety," he offered. "Then I'll be on my way." Dahlia's relief was visible, though pride made her straighten her shoulders. "I can pay you fair wages for your time, Mr. Fletcher. I'm not looking for charity." "Wasn't offering any," Miles replied, allowing the ghost of a smile to touch his weathered face. "And it's just Miles." As the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in shades of crimson and gold, they worked together to gather the scattered cattle. Miles couldn't help noticing how capable Dahlia was despite her circumstances. She rode like someone born to the saddle, her commands to the cattle clear and confident. "Where did you learn to handle cattle?" he asked as they pushed the herd toward a hidden valley Dahlia knew of a few miles east. "My father was a rancher in Texas before we came north," she explained. "I grew up on horseback before we lost the ranch and started the store." She paused, a shadow crossing her face. This small herd was his dream of starting over. Miles nodded, understanding all too well the hope for new beginnings. "It's a good herd, strong stock." They made camp in the valley as night fell, the cattle settling in the lush grass beside a narrow creek. Under the vast canopy of stars, they sat beside a small fire, careful to keep it low to avoid attracting attention. "You're not just passing through, are you?" Dahlia asked as she handed Miles a tin cup of coffee. "No one just passes through Timber Creek." Miles stared into the flames. "I was heading north, Thought I might try my hand at trapping in Canada. Running from something, he looked up, startled by her directness. What makes you say that? Dahlia's expression softened. The way you ride, always checking your back trail, the fact that your gun belt shows more wear than most men twice your age. You're observant, Miss Valente. Have to be to survive out here as a woman alone. She sipped her coffee. So are you, running? Miles considered lying, but something about the night and their shared danger made the truth slip out. Not anymore, not exactly, just not staying anywhere too long. Dahlia nodded as if that explained everything. Well, I'm grateful our paths crossed when they did. That night, Miles took the first watch, studying Dahlia's sleeping form in the firelight. She couldn't be more than 25, yet she carried herself with the gravity of someone who'd seen far more than her years suggested. He told himself his interest was merely concern she was alone and vulnerable despite her capability. By morning, he'd help her secure the cattle, then continue north as planned. But as dawn broke over the eastern ridge, they awoke to the sound of approaching riders. Miles was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Dahlia scrambled up beside him, rifle ready. Wade's men, he asked quietly. No. She squinted into the rising sun. That's Sheriff Daniels from town and looks like Doc Harrison with him. The riders approached cautiously, hands visible to show they meant no harm. The sheriff, a burly man with a graying mustache, dismounted first. Miss Valente, he said, nodding respectfully. Heard the shooting yesterday. Came as soon as I could gather some men. He glanced at Miles suspiciously. This man giving you trouble? Quite the opposite, Sheriff, Dahlia replied. Mr. Fletcher here saved my life and my cattle. Wade's men would have taken everything if not for him. The sheriff's expression softened slightly as he extended a hand toward Miles. Then we owe you our thanks, mister. Timber Creek looks after its own. Miles accepted the handshake cautiously, just happened to be in the right place. Well, we've got news, the sheriff continued. Wade's in jail. 2 of his men rode into town last night, drunk and boasting about the attack on your place. They didn't realize I was sitting right there in the saloon. Dahlia's face brightened. You arrested them and Wade both. Found papers in his office showing he'd been forging deeds all over the county. He won't be troubling you again. The sheriff paused. But your place, I'm sorry, Miss Valente. They set fire to the store before they left town. The color drained from Dahlia's face. Everything's gone. The store, yes. The cabin's still standing, though damaged. We saved what we could. Miles watched as Dahlia absorbed the news, her expression cycling through shock, grief, and finally a steely resolve that impressed him. Then I'll rebuild, she said firmly. I still have the land and the cattle. The sheriff nodded, clearly relieved by her response. The town will help. Timber Creek takes care of its own, he repeated. You can stay with Mrs. Whitley until your place is habitable again. Thank you, Sheriff, Dahlia said. But Miles noticed her hands trembling slightly despite her brave words. After the sheriff and doctor departed, promising to send help for moving the cattle back, Miles found himself struggling with a decision he hadn't anticipated making. The logical choice was to continue his journey north. He'd fulfilled his impromptu promise to help. Yet watching Dahlia quietly gathering her few possessions, her face set in determined lines despite the occasional tear she quickly wiped away, something long dormant stirred within him. I could stay, he said abruptly. Help you rebuild, just until you're back on your feet. Dahlia looked up, genuine surprise crossing her features. You don't have to do that. You've already done more than enough for a stranger. We fought together, Miles said simply. That makes us more than strangers. A small smile touched her lips. I suppose it does. She studied him for a moment. Why would you delay your plans for me? Miles considered the question, surprised by his own offer. 5 years of solitude had become his shield against the pain of his past. Yet here he was, volunteering to stay in one place and help someone he barely knew. Maybe I'm tired of running, he admitted, the truth of the words surprising him as he spoke them. And maybe your fight reminded me there are still things worth standing for. The journey back to Timber Creek was easier with the sheriff's men helping to drive the cattle. As they crested the final hill overlooking the town, Miles saw what remained of Dahlia's homestead, the charred skeleton of the general store, the damaged cabin with its partially collapsed roof. the sturdy barn that had somehow escaped the worst of the damage. "It's not as bad as I feared," Dahlia said softly beside him. "The foundation's still good. We can rebuild from there." Miles admired her resilience. "We'll start with the cabin, get you a proper roof over your head before winter comes." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. True to the sheriff's word, the people of Timber Creek rallied around Dahlia. Men arrived with lumber and tools, women brought food and supplies, and gradually, the homestead began to take shape again. Miles worked from dawn until dusk alongside the townspeople, finding unexpected satisfaction in the physical labor and shared purpose. Dahlia stayed with the widow Whitley as promised, but spent her days at the homestead, working just as hard as any man. Miles often found himself watching her, the way sunlight caught in her dark hair, how her face lit up when she laughed with the women who came to help, the quiet determination with which she approached every task. One evening, as they sat on the newly rebuilt porch watching the sunset, Dahlia turned to Miles with curiosity in her eyes. "You never speak of your past," she observed. "Everyone in town has been wondering about the mysterious Miles Fletcher." Miles tensed slightly. "Not much to tell." "I think there's a great deal to tell," she countered gently. "But I won't pry. Just know that whatever ghosts you're carrying, you don't have to face them alone anymore." Her words penetrated the armor he'd built around himself over the years. Perhaps it was time to let someone in just a little. "I had a wife once," he said quietly, staring at the horizon, "and a son. In Wyoming, we had a small ranch, nothing grand, but it was ours." The words came slowly, painfully. "Men came working for a cattle baron who wanted our water rights. I was away hunting. When I returned—" His voice faltered. Dahlia's hand found his, her touch warm and steady. "You don't have to continue." Miles shook his head. "It's been 5 years. I should be able to say it by now." He took a deep breath. "They killed my family and burned everything. I tracked those men for months. Found each one. After that, I couldn't bear to stay anywhere. Every place felt temporary." "I'm so sorry, Miles," Dahlia whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "No one should endure such loss." "Your father," Miles said, changing the subject. "Tell me about him." A soft smile played across her lips. "He was a dreamer. Always believed the next valley, the next opportunity would be the one that changed our fortunes. After my mother died of fever in Texas, he became restless. We moved north, tried farming in Kansas, then a silver claim in Colorado that played out within months. And finally, Timber Creek." Dahlia nodded. "The store was profitable, but his heart was always with the land. The cattle were his last dream, a small start that he hoped would grow into something we could build a future on." Her voice caught. "He died believing in that future." "Then we'll make sure his faith wasn't misplaced," Miles said firmly. As autumn approached, the cabin and a small but sturdy replacement for the store were completed. The cattle had thrived in the summer pastures, with 3 new calves strengthening the herd. Miles knew his promised time of helping until Dahlia was back on her feet had been fulfilled. She had a home again, the support of the town, and prospects for the future. Yet each morning, he found another task that needed his attention: fences to mend, a new well to dig, winter preparations to make. Each delay felt like a reprieve from the inevitable moment when he would have to decide whether to leave or admit he wanted to stay. The decision was forced one crisp September morning when a letter arrived from the territorial marshal. Sheriff Daniels rode out to deliver it personally. "Marshal needs testimony against Wade and his gang," the sheriff explained as Miles read the official summons. "Trial's set for next month in Helena. You're named as a key witness, Fletcher." Miles folded the letter carefully. "I'll be there." After the sheriff departed, Dahlia approached Miles where he stood splitting wood. "Helena's a good distance. You'll be gone at least 2 weeks. Probably longer," Miles agreed, bringing the axe down with more force than necessary. The trial could stretch on. Dahlia was quiet for a moment. "Will you come back afterward?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Miles set down the axe, finally facing the truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never meant to stay this long in the first place." Pain flashed across Dahlia's face before she composed herself. "Of course, you've more than fulfilled your promise to help me rebuild." She straightened her shoulders. I wish you safe travels whenever you decide to go. She turned to leave, but Miles caught her arm gently. Dahlia eyed the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain the conflict within him? The fear of caring for someone again, of being vulnerable to loss, battling against the growing certainty that she had become essential to him. It's all right, Miles, she said softly. I understand. Some wounds take longer to heal than others. That night, Miles lay awake in the small room behind the barn that had become his quarters, considering his options. The summons to Helena provided the perfect opportunity, a natural conclusion to his time in Timber Creek. He could testify at the trial, then continue north as he'd originally planned. Yet the thought of leaving Dahlia and the life they had begun to build together left a hollowness in his chest that no amount of reasoning could fill. Over these months, she had quietly worked her way past his defenses, her strength and kindness a balm to his wounded soul. Morning brought no clarity. Miles went about his chores mechanically, aware of Dahlia doing the same, a new distance between them that neither knew how to bridge. They worked side by side repairing the corral fence, their usual easy conversation replaced by strained silence. When the fence was finished, Dahlia wiped her brow and turned to face him directly. I need to collect supplies from town. Would you mind checking the north pasture while I'm gone? The new calves have been wandering too far. Of course, Miles agreed, relieved to have some time alone to think. He watched her ride toward town, her straight back and proud posture now as familiar to him as his own reflection. The thought of never seeing her again made his chest ache in a way he hadn't experienced since losing his family. The north pasture was peaceful, the young calves frolicking under the watchful eyes of their mothers. Miles rode the perimeter, checking for breaks in the fence line, his mind still turning over his dilemma. As he crested a small rise, he noticed movement on the distant road riders approaching fast, too many for a social call. Instinct honed by years on the frontier had him spurring his horse toward the homestead. As he drew closer, his worst fears were confirmed. 3 men had Dahlia surrounded in the yard. Even from a distance, he could see she was putting up a fight, but she was outnumbered and outgunned. Miles drew his rifle from its scabbard, approaching under cover of the tree line to assess the situation. He recognized one of the men, a known associate of Harlan Wade, who must have escaped the initial arrests. They were likely seeking revenge, or perhaps trying to eliminate witnesses before the trial. Dahlia stood defiantly before them, shotgun in hand but outnumbered 3-1. I won't be intimidated, Miles heard her say as he crept closer. Wade will face justice for what he's done. Wade sends his regards, the leader sneered, drawing his pistol. Says to tell you he'll be seeing your pa real soon. Before the man could level his weapon, Miles fired, the shot catching him in the shoulder. As the attacker fell from his horse, Miles emerged from cover, rifle trained on the remaining 2 men. Next shot won't be so merciful, he called out. Drop your weapons. The standoff lasted only seconds before both men reached for their guns. Miles fired twice more in rapid succession, hitting one squarely in the chest. The third man managed to get off a wild shot before Dahlia's shotgun blast knocked him from his saddle. When the gunsmoke cleared, 2 men lay dead in the yard, with the wounded leader trying to crawl toward his fallen pistol. Miles kicked the weapon away, then bound the man's hands with a length of rope. One of Wade's, he asked Dahlia, who was already checking the other men for signs of life. His foreman and 2 ranch hands, she confirmed. They must have been hiding out since Wade's arrest. Miles secured the prisoner to a post. I'll ride for the sheriff. Are you hurt? No, Dahlia said, though her hands shook slightly as she lowered the shotgun. Miles, I thank you again. He looked at her, suddenly acutely aware of how close he'd come to losing her. Without thinking, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She stiffened in surprise before melting into his embrace, her arms circling his waist. I was so afraid I wouldn't get here in time, he murmured into her hair, when I saw them surrounding you. Dahlia pulled back slightly to look up at him, her eyes bright with emotion. You came back for me. I'll always come back for you, Miles said, the words emerging with the force of absolute truth. I think I knew at the moment I decided to help you with those rustlers. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, the meeting of two souls who had known too much loss to rush headlong into hope. When they parted, Miles kept his hands on her shoulders, reluctant to break the connection. "I need to get the sheriff," he reminded her softly, "and I'll watch our prisoner," she agreed, a new warmth in her eyes as she said, "our." The following weeks brought a flurry of activity. The captured foreman confessed that Wade had orchestrated the attack from his jail cell, hoping to eliminate witnesses before the trial. The revelation led to additional charges and strengthened the case against the land grabber. When the time came to travel to Helena for the trial, Miles and Dahlia made the journey together. The territorial court was imposing a grand building that represented the civilization gradually taking hold across the frontier. Miles testified about the rustling attempt and the subsequent attack, his clear account helping to secure Wade's conviction. The journey home was filled with quiet conversation as they planned for the future, expanding the cattle operation, improving the store, perhaps adding rooms to the cabin as needed. Neither spoke directly of marriage, yet their discussions assumed a shared life stretching before them. As winter descended on Timber Creek, Miles and Dahlia settled into a comfortable routine. He moved from the room behind the barn into the cabin, taking the small bedroom off the kitchen, while Dahlia maintained her father's old room. The arrangement raised eyebrows in town, but Sheriff Daniels silenced the gossips with a stern reminder of all the couple had endured. Christmas approached, bringing with it the first heavy snows and festive preparations throughout the town. Dahlia threw herself into decorating the small store, which had begun to prosper under her careful management. Miles found himself drawn into the community's celebration preparations, helping to cut evergreens for the church, and assisting with repairs to the schoolhouse where the town's Christmas gathering would be held. One evening, as they sat beside the fire after a long day's work, Miles cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking about something, Dahlia." She looked up from her mending, a soft smile on her lips. "That sounds ominous." "Not ominous," he assured her. "Just important." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. "I made this for you." Dahlia set aside her sewing and accepted the box with curious fingers. When she opened it, her breath caught. Inside lay a ring, a simple silver band with a small pearl set in its center. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It was my mother's," Miles explained. "The only thing I kept when I left Wyoming. I had a jeweler in Helena set the pearl. It reminded me of your strength. Pearls come from adversity, yet they're beautiful because of it, not despite it." Dahlia looked up, her eyes shining. "Miles," he took her hands in his, the ring box between them. "I never thought I'd find home again, Dahlia, or family. When I lost Sarah and little James, I lost myself too. These past months with you, you've helped me remember who I was, who I could be again." A tear slipped down Dahlia's cheek. "You've done the same for me. After Father died, I was so alone, so scared. You gave me the courage to fight for what's mine." "I love you," Miles said simply. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you defending your cattle with that Winchester." "Will you marry me, Dahlia Valente? Will you help me build something permanent, something ours?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her smile radiant through her tears. "Nothing would make me happier." The town's Christmas gathering became an impromptu engagement celebration when Sheriff Daniels announced the news. The schoolhouse erupted in cheers and well wishes, the community genuinely happy for the couple who had endured so much. They were married on New Year's Day, 1879, in a simple ceremony in the town's small church. Dahlia wore a dress of deep blue that Mrs. Whitley had helped her make, with lace collar and cuffs that had once belonged to her mother. Miles wore a new suit purchased in Helena, looking almost uncomfortable in such finery after months in practical work clothes. As they exchanged vows before the minister, Miles found himself truly believing in the future for the first time in 5 years. When he slipped his mother's ring onto Dahlia's finger, he felt a sense of completion, the past honored but no longer defining him. The wedding celebration spilled out of the church and into the town's hotel dining room, where a feast awaited. Dancing continued well into the evening, with even the most reserved townspeople joining in the merriment. Through it all, Miles kept Dahlia close, still marveling that this brave, beautiful woman had chosen to share her life with him. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of their cabin, truly theirs now, Miles pulled Dahlia into his arms, breathing in the scent of pine and snow and the lavender water she had dabbed behind her ears. "Mrs. Fletcher," he murmured against her temple. "I like the sound of that." "As do I," she replied, nestling closer in the cold winter air. "Though I must confess I never imagined myself a rancher's wife." "Are you disappointed?" Miles asked, suddenly concerned. Dahlia laughed softly. "Not in the slightest. I grew up on a ranch, remember." "It's in my blood as much as yours." She pulled back to look up at him. "Besides, we're not just ranchers. We're shopkeepers and witnesses for justice and builders of this community." "And builders of a family?" Miles asked hesitantly, the question revealing his deepest hope. Dahlia's eyes softened. "Yes," she whispered, "a family of our own." The winter passed in a blissful haze as they adjusted to married life. The small cabin that had once felt temporary to both of them became a true home, filled with laughter and love and plans for the future. As the snow melted and spring brought new growth to the land, their cattle operation began to expand with a healthy crop of calves. The store prospered as well. Dahlia's keen business sense and Miles's practical knowledge made them a formidable team. They added a line of farming implements and seeds, anticipating the needs of new settlers arriving with the railroad's steady approach toward Timber Creek. By early summer, Dahlia's suspicions were confirmed. They were expecting their first child. The news filled Miles with both joy and trepidation. The memory of losing his son James could still pierce his heart, but Dahlia's unwavering confidence helped calm his fears. "This child is a gift," she told him one evening as they sat on their porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass. "A symbol of our love and hope for the future. We can't let fear of what might happen prevent us from embracing the joy before us now." Miles placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "When did you get so wise, Dahlia Fletcher?" "I've always been wise," she teased. "You were just too busy being brooding and mysterious to notice." As Dahlia's pregnancy progressed, Miles threw himself into preparations with characteristic thoroughness. He expanded their cabin, adding a proper bedroom for the baby and a larger kitchen for Dahlia. He built a rocking chair that sat by the fireplace, ready for nights of soothing their child. The town doctor, impressed by Miles's attentiveness, jokingly suggested he might have a future in medicine. In late January 1880, as a winter storm howled outside their snug cabin, Dahlia gave birth to a healthy son they named Thomas Daniel Fletcher Thomas for Dahlia's father, Daniel for the sheriff who had become a dear friend and would stand as godfather. Miles held his son with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life and the second chance he'd been given. The boy had Dahlia's dark hair and Miles's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. "He's perfect," Miles whispered, carefully returning the infant to Dahlia's arms. "Just like his mother," Dahlia smiled tiredly. "He has your chin, and I suspect your stubborn nature as well." "Heaven help us if he does," Miles laughed softly, sitting beside them on the bed and marveling at his family words he'd once thought he would never say again. Spring brought not only the joy of watching Thomas grow, but also unprecedented prosperity to their enterprises. The cattle herd had nearly tripled since Dahlia's father had begun it, with Miles's careful breeding and management yielding strong, healthy stock that brought premium prices. The store had become a center of community life, with Dahlia baby Thomas often strapped to her back, maintaining the books and ordering stock with precision. As summer approached, they received unexpected news from the territorial capital. The governor, impressed by the testimony Miles and Dahlia had given at Harlan Wade's trial, invited them to Helena for a special recognition ceremony honoring citizens who had stood against corruption and lawlessness. "It seems our little stand against Wade made quite an impression," Dahlia remarked as she read the official letter. Miles shrugged uncomfortably. "We did what anyone would do." "No," Dahlia corrected gently. "We did what few have the courage to do. We stood against a powerful man when it would have been easier to run." The journey to Helena was Thomas's first significant trip, and the 3-month-old proved himself an excellent traveler, charming fellow passengers on the stagecoach with his bright eyes and ready smile. The ceremony itself was grander than either Miles or Dahlia had anticipated, with the governor personally presenting them with commendations for their bravery. The frontier is tamed not just by law badges and army forts, the governor proclaimed to the assembled dignitaries, but by ordinary citizens who refuse to surrender to lawlessness and greed. Mr. and Mrs. Fletcher embody the spirit that will transform these territories into prosperous states. That evening, at a reception following the ceremony, Miles found himself approached by a distinguished gentleman who introduced himself as Senator James Berkshire. "Mr. Fletcher, I've heard a great deal about your cattle operation," the senator said, shaking Miles's hand firmly. "I represent several Eastern investors looking to establish quality breeding stock in Montana. Would you consider selling some of your bulls?" The conversation that followed opened unexpected doors. By the time they returned to Timber Creek, Miles had secured not only a lucrative contract for breeding stock, but also connections to markets in Chicago and St. Louis for their future herds. "It seems our fortunes are truly changing," Dahlia observed as they settled back into their home. "From nearly losing everything to building something even greater than we imagined." Miles watched her as she nursed Thomas beside the evening fire, her face serene in the golden light. "The cattle and the store are just the means," he said softly. "This you and Thomas, this is the fortune that matters." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The harsh winter of 1881 tested their resilience, with blizzards that threatened the herd and cut Timber Creek off from supplies for weeks. Yet they endured, their partnership strengthening as they faced each obstacle together. Thomas grew into a spirited toddler with his father's love of horses and his mother's quick mind. When Dahlia discovered she was expecting their second child in the spring of 1882, the news brought twice the joy. The doctor confirmed she was carrying twins. "2 babies," Miles repeated, looking stunned when Dahlia shared the doctor's suspicions. "Are you certain, doctor?" "Harrison seems quite sure," Dahlia laughed, placing Miles's hand on her already rounded belly. "He says I'm measuring much larger than I should be at this stage, and he heard 2 distinct heartbeats." Miles paled slightly before breaking into a broad grin. "Well, Thomas has been asking for a pony. Perhaps siblings will distract him for a while." The twins, a boy and girl they named William and Emma, arrived in early autumn, bringing double the joy and double the work to the Fletcher household. Miles hired additional help for both the ranch and store, insisting that Dahlia take time to recover and enjoy their expanded family. As Timber Creek grew with the arrival of the railroad in 1883, so did the Fletcher's enterprises. Miles's breeding program gained national recognition, with ranchers from as far away as Texas traveling to purchase his stock. Dahlia expanded the store into a proper mercantile, adding a second floor with a small lending library, fulfilling a dream she'd had since childhood. By Thomas's 5th birthday, their homestead had transformed into a proper ranch with a new 2-story house, bunkhouse for the hands, expanded barns and corrals. The original cabin remained, preserved as a reminder of their beginnings, and occasionally used as a quiet retreat when the busy main house became overwhelming. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home watching Thomas lead the 3-year-old twins in an improvised game, Miles took Dahlia's hand in his. "Did you ever imagine this?" he asked, gesturing to the prosperous ranch spread before them. "When you were fighting those rustlers alone that day," Dahlia leaned against his shoulder. "I was just trying to survive that day, but later when you stayed to help me rebuild." She smiled up at him. "Then I began to hope." Miles kissed her gently. "Hope suits you, Mrs. Fletcher." "As does happiness suit you, Mr. Fletcher," she returned. "You don't look nearly so brooding these days." He laughed, the sound coming easily now after years of healing. "I have no reason to brood. Everything I could want is right here." In the summer of 1885, they received a letter from Sheriff Daniels, now retired but still a close friend. Harlan Wade had died in territorial prison, unrepentant to the end. The news brought a sense of final closure to a chapter of their lives that had shaped them profoundly. "It feels like the end of an era," Dahlia remarked as they discussed the letter over dinner. "So much of our life together began because of his wickedness, yet we've built something beautiful from it." "That's the truest victory," Miles agreed. "Not just surviving, but thriving despite his attempts to destroy you." As their children grew, so did their legacy in Timber Creek. Miles served terms on the town council and helped establish the region's first cattlemen's association. Dahlia founded a women's literary society and campaigned successfully for a proper schoolhouse to replace the one-room structure that had served the community for decades. Their home became a gathering place for the community, known for its warm hospitality and open doors. Young ranchers sought Miles's advice. Young wives turned to Dahlia for guidance. The Fletcher name became synonymous with integrity and generosity throughout the county. In 1890, as Montana celebrated its first year of statehood, the Fletchers marked their own milestone, 10 years of marriage. The celebration, held under cottonwood trees beside the creek where they had once hidden cattle from rustlers, brought together the entire community and friends from as far away as Helena. During the festivities, Thomas, now 11, and showing every sign of following in his father's footsteps as a rancher, approached his parents with a carefully wrapped package. "The twins and I wanted to give you something special," he explained solemnly, presenting the gift to his mother while the 7-year-old twins watched eagerly. Inside was a hand-crafted photo album, its cover tooled with the Fletcher brand and filled with photographs documenting their family's growth and the ranch's development. "Mr. Peterson at the photography studio helped us," Emma explained, referring to the town's newly established photographer. "We collected all the pictures we could find." Dahlia turned the pages slowly, tears welling in her eyes as she viewed the visual history of their lives together, their wedding day, Thomas as a baby, the twins' christening, the raising of the new house, cattle drives, Christmases, birthdays, all the moments that had woven together to create the tapestry of their shared life. "This is the most precious gift," she whispered, hugging each child in turn. Miles, looking over her shoulder at the images, felt a profound sense of gratitude. The lonely, haunted man who had ridden into Timber Creek that fateful day existed now only in memory, transformed by Dahlia's love and the family they had created together. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Miles and Dahlia stood on the porch of their home, arms around each other as they gazed at the stars spangling the vast Montana sky. "12 years ago, I thought my life was over," Miles said softly. "I was just going through the motions, existing but not living. Then I heard gunshots and found a fierce woman defending her cattle against impossible odds." Dahlia smiled against his chest. "And I thought I'd lost everything when my father died. I was prepared to fight alone, even if it meant losing." "We saved each other," Miles observed. "You know that, don't you? You think I rescued you from those rustlers, but you rescued me from a far worse fate, a life without love, without purpose." "Perhaps that's the greatest gift we can give each other," Dahlia replied. "The chance to be our best selves, to build something that matters." As moonlight silvered the landscape, highlighting the flourishing ranch that had grown from near devastation, Miles felt a completeness he had once thought forever beyond his reach. From the ashes of their separate tragedies, they had forged a life of profound joy and meaning, not just for themselves but for their children and community. "I love you, Dahlia Fletcher," he whispered against her hair, "today and always." "And I love you, Miles Fletcher," she answered, her voice carrying the same certainty it had when she'd first accepted his proposal. "For saving my cattle, for healing my heart, and for giving me a family I never dreamed possible." They remained on the porch long into the night, wrapped in each other's arms, their conversation flowing easily between reflections on the past and plans for the future. The Montana wilderness, that had once seemed so harsh and unforgiving, now felt like the perfect setting for their love story, vast enough to contain their dreams, yet intimate enough to feel like home. In the quiet darkness, surrounded by the life they had built together, Both Miles and Dahlia knew with absolute certainty that their greatest adventure still lay ahead, not in facing down rustlers or battling land grabbers, but in the daily miracle of loving each other and watching their family thrive in the land they had fought so hard to defend. And as dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and promise, they greeted the new day as they had learned to greet every day together, stronger for having faced yesterday's storms and hopeful for whatever tomorrow might bring.